us a little bit about Israeli politics. How is it like to live in Israel, especially from your point of view as belonging to the oppressed, to the colonized and oppressed group? Can you like give us like a quick picture of what Israeli politics looks like? I'm guessing it's very right wing, even for left-wing, supposed left-wing parties and movements. But yeah, I don't know, what is it like?
So Israeli politics is, because when we talk about Israeli politics, it's important to talk about Israeli society as a reflection, as you know, politics is a reflection of that society. So as a society, the Israeli society is very different in the sense that you have people who come from different parts of the world. So it is culturally very diverse. So you have Jewish mainly from Europe, Jewish from former USSR, and then you have Jewish people from Arab countries who all came together and then built that structure, whatever we want to call it. So the politics tends to be sometimes a reflection of the differences, but also we have to keep in mind that because of these differences, there's some kind of a social hierarchy that was created naturally, because this is a settler colonial project. So even within its group, within the dominant group, they have that hierarchical order where you have, for instance, the Ashkenazi Jewish male on the top versus the Mizrahi Jews on the very bottom of that, or the Ethiopian Jews on the very bottom of that pyramid. So, and yeah, again, Israeli politics is a reflection of that. The only thing that all these people who came from different parts of the world have actually in common is that military experience. So basically, it's the animosity towards the indigenous people. And that's what makes them a nation. If you think about it, by the end of the day, the only thing that they have in common as a nation, as they claim to be, is the fact that they have a common enemy, and that they exercise their hostility towards the indigenous population of the Palestinian people in Palestine. So that's an important point to keep in mind, because that will also explain many things that happen or don't happen necessarily in the Israeli politics. So when we talk about Israeli politics, the whole spectrum, obviously, as you mentioned earlier, is the political spectrum is naturally and organically built on the right. Because once you establish a structure that discriminates and that is violent and aggressive towards indigenous people, then naturally you're not a progressive entity. So the whole spectrum exists on that premise, which is highly problematic, because it's really then difficult to talk about all these nuances between left and right and center. But what does left mean? How left are they? How progressive? Are they progressive? But then when we talk about Palestinian rights, they're not progressive. They're not so left anymore. So we have to keep that in mind, because I would argue that from its inception, that political scene or domestic politics in Israel is predominantly a right-wing project. It's an exclusionist project. It's a project that doesn't want to include or make space for indigenous people.
Excellent point that it is a project based on hatred. And if you remove this hatred, then it would completely collapse. It wouldn't have like a reason to exist, right? And it begs plenty of questions, because from my perspective, all these people who pretend to be Jews, but I'm not so sure that they are really Jews, like practicing Jews, who go to Israel to get some sorts of benefits, who are looking for like a better life. I'm not sure they were escaping like death or threats or whatever. Isn't there like some element of moral bankruptcy, because you're like signing a pact with the devil, and generally it ends very badly. So what's your perspective on this?
So the way that the Jewish Zionist agency sells aliyah, or basic immigration, or settler colonialism in the world, is that this is a democracy. It's a functioning, vibrant democracy. It's safe, and
Safe for
everyone, which is very bipolar by itself, because they're constantly crying and whinging and complaining about not being safe, and this is why they need nuclear power. This is why they don't want to have a deal with Iran. This is why they want to maintain their edge as a hegemon in the region, because they feel that they're very, very unsafe, and they're surrounded by all these threats and enemies. But on the other hand, they want every Jewish person in the world to go and live in that space. So which one is it? It can be both. You can't be feeling all these threats and at the same time inviting all these people to come to this so-called safe and vibrant democracy. So many people who actually do end up as settlers in Palestine, they don't know about that reality. They don't know. They really don't know. They're being sold this Zionist dream, and they think that if I go there, I'm fighting against, because again, this feeds into the dehumanization and demonization of Palestinians. The Palestinians are portrayed as terrorists. They're portrayed as less than human, and they don't respect, as if Palestinians are not, they don't get human rights, and they don't get compassion, and they're not humans like us. And this is something that is widely spread. So this is how they sell the Zionist dream, that you are going there. It's a very nice place. It's got beaches, Mediterranean, lovely land for all 4 seasons. Why wouldn't you want to go live in that piece of land? It's very nice. It's beautiful. And then on top of that, you are offered, of course, some privileges and you will get
material
housing. Yes, yeah. Housing, free support. They will teach you the language. There's a few other privileges as well that I at the moment I can't remember, but they tie lots of financial privileges to it. And they're told that they are defending, they're fighting anti-Semitism and terrorism. So
yeah, defending Jewishness, maybe.
Yes, Jewishness. And of course, this is a moral bankruptcy for anyone. And I think people, before you migrate to some place, you have the moral obligation to to know and to educate yourself and know where you're going. So yeah, it doesn't release anyone from that responsibility, anyone.
Exactly. And it's not like we're living in the Middle Ages. I mean, TV has been around for a long time, and even in Western media for a long time, you still had from time to time some documentaries and things like that, which for some part of the truth of what's going on. So at least you would ask yourself if you
yeah. But it's also beyond. After that point of migrating, the question is, what do you do with that privilege? So after you've migrated, let's say you were a misinformed person, from Russia, or a refugee in Ethiopia or one of the African countries, and you've migrated and you've discovered that this is a different story to what you've been fed. What are you doing? Where's your agency? And I think everyone has agency, and people can definitely change behavior, and just that's not something that is unheard of.
I know that people do leave Israel. From what I've heard, I follow a little bit what happens in France more than other Western countries. From what I've heard, I don't have like official statistics, but from what I've heard is that they didn't like it. Not so much for the moral reasons. It's because some of them were Sephardis, and they didn't find jobs. They were hated in Israel because they were at the bottom of the Jewish.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yes, that's definitely something. And there's also even, I'll give you an example. There was a very famous singer who's called Zohar Argov, who was very famous, but I think he's Yemeni. He's definitely he's a Mizrahi. I don't know where exactly, but my guess is Yemeni. And after he died, people wanted to name a street after Zohar Argov because he was a very famous singer. But that didn't happen because people rejected that notion of like, no, he's Mizrahi and we don't want he's that wasn't said out loud, but by the end of the day, it was rejected. And we have, on the other hand, many artists and cultural figures that are from European countries who are being hailed and as cultural figures, and you have streets named after them.
People, unfortunately, happens a lot in these societies, Western societies, from what I've seen, and I'm not surprised it happens in Israel as well. People internalize these hierarchies very, very quickly.
Yes.
Especially if it gives them advantages or privileges, you should say.
Yeah. So and that's the other part. That's one of the damages that Zionism has caused Jewish people from Arab countries, like that self-destruction aspect where they don't speak. Let's say they adopted the Ashkenazi dialect. They don't speak Hebrew in the Mizrahi dialect. You know what I mean? So they want to sound like Ashkenazi. Their language, they don't speak Arabic, even though they speak it at home or with their families, but they don't speak it outside. The food, what kind of food they cook and what kind of food they bring to schools. So all of that self-destruction again is a byproduct of Zionism for Arab Jews.
Excellent point. It really joins the idea of what I said earlier. When you sign a pact with the devil, generally you're generally going to lose, and lose a lot. And these Jews, not all of them, of course, but those who used to live in North Africa, and many of them had arrived to North Africa in 1492 after they were excluded by the monarchy, Christians. They were persecuted. Actually, they stayed 4.5 centuries in North Africa. They were very well. They were treated equally, except during the Caliphate times, where they had to pay like an extra tax because they weren't Muslim. But it's just a tax, right? And as far as I know, it wasn't exuberant. So yeah, what happened, unfortunately, to these people is that in the case of Algeria, but it's also true in the case of Tunisia and Morocco, is that when France arrived in the 1800s, gradually they took the side of the colonizer. These Jews, not all of them, but many of them. And guess what happened afterwards? So France stayed a little bit more than a century in North Africa, and then France was kicked out because it had no legitimacy, and people paid the price for it. Paid very high.
Yeah.
Those Jews, when they had to go to France, where they were hated. And, they had to go to France right after the Holocaust. They were in France in the 60s, and the Holocaust happened just before that. Can you imagine? They lost everything. They were very well in North Africa. They could have stayed. They could have joined the resistance, etc. But they decided to take the side of France, of the colonizer, and they lost everything. And I'm sure some of them went to Israel afterwards because they were so much hated in France. But then they were also hated in Israel because they're Sephardis, right? And they're at the bottom. So yeah, it's exactly that. You said it. It's like self-destruction. It's a cultural self-destruction. So yeah, it's a very sad story. But not all Jews are like that. Some of them joined the resistance. So, but unfortunately, the massive majority did side with France. They gave European and French names to their children. This is one way of knowing which side people choose, right? What names they give to their children.
And so, it's true, but this is also why settler colonialism is so cruel, because it fractures societies, right? I mean, Jewish people were a part of they were living there with Christians and Muslims. They are part of the scene. And what settler colonialism does is that it attacks societies and starts fracturing and fragmenting societies based on these mythical identities, in the sense that just because I'm Jewish, then I have to behave differently to my Muslim friends, or then my alliance or my allegiance should be placed with different people and not with the people that I actually live with and have been living with.
What do you think of, to talk a bit about the news, of the end of Netanyahu's reign in politics? What do you think it will it change something really?
Change for who? So that's the question.
Situation.
No, look, nothing has changed on the Palestinian front. The policies are still the same, and they're the same policies that have been in place since 1948. So it's land confiscation, it's land grab, it's subjugation, it's all these laws that we're saying that there's more of them now. These laws that discriminate against Palestinians, all these practices and policies that we see being carried out in Gaza, in the West Bank, the blockade, the siege, the inhumane and illegal blockade. So there hasn't been a change in the grand strategy of Israel, if we want to talk about grand strategies and policies. And it doesn't matter who's the prime minister or who's in the coalition and who's in the opposition, because they have guidelines and there's like fundamental values, let's say, that they all share as Zionists. And as Zionists, they're all, with regards to the, it doesn't matter where they stand on the political spectrum, they all are defenders of Zionism. And they all are defenders of settler colonialism, even the most progressive ones, because their progressiveness does not extend to the Palestinian people. So no, of course, nothing is going to change. We're going to keep seeing more settlement expansion. We're going to keep seeing more cases of ethnic cleansing and disposition, such as we're seeing now in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan. We will, the siege, no one will know if the siege is going to be uplifted anytime soon. Definitely not due to Israeli policies. So yeah, nothing is going to change in terms of Israeli policy towards the Palestinian.
Can you tell us like concrete examples of this apartheid that is happening against Palestinians in Israel in like day-to-day life? How does it translate?
So the way that the apartheid system translates on the ground, let's start from Gaza. Yeah? In Gaza, we have 2 million people living in what's been labeled as the biggest open-air prison in the world. And these people are being the subject of collective punishment for the last 14 years. Since 2006, no one can leave or enter Gaza. There's restrictions on trade and import, and what can Gazans import and what they're not allowed to eat. There's been lots of statements from Israeli officials that they say that they want to put Gaza on a diet. They count the calories. They count the calories of food and what the food intake of Gazans. So that level of domination is simply sick. Like it's that level of
it's sadistic.
Yeah, it's sadistic. So we have that in Gaza. On the other hand, we have, when we look at the West Bank, we have Bantustans as well. So we have every city, every town is surrounded by checkpoints, but also surrounded by settlements who are constantly expanding and suffocating these towns. We have Jerusalem also, which is a very unique case where you have Jerusalemites who live there as not an Israeli citizen, but as residents. So they don't have citizenship status. And again, their existence in the city is also a target. It's been targeted by Israeli policies. And there's constant attempts to empty the city, the old city, from its Palestinians inhabitants. And then in 1948 as well, inside Israel, we have all these laws, the discriminatory and racist laws that discriminate against Palestinians and Palestinian citizens. For instance, we have most notably the right of return. the denial, lack of right of return. So you can only, or citizenship, the laws of citizenship means you can only become a citizen if you prove that you have Jewish ancestry. And this is, again, this is a way to combat or prevent Palestinians from returning to their homelands and their houses that they were forcefully evicted from in 1948. We have laws against family reunification, for instance. So Palestinians in 1948, even if they marry a Palestinian from 1967, which is the West Bank and Gaza, or Palestinian from refugee camps, they're not allowed to bring them back to Palestine, and they're not allowed to issue citizenship status for their spouses. And this is another way to prevent or deny the right of return to other Palestinians. So the land of the laws of land and other laws that clearly discriminate against Palestinians, the land confiscation and ongoing restriction on Palestinian towns inside Israel in 1948. That's also something that we can see when it comes to planning, civil planning. That's definitely something that is visible.
So the situation of what they call, what Israel calls the Israeli Arabs. So this is your situation, right?
Well, I'm not Israeli because by definition, the state rejects me. So even so there's that part of it, because by definition, the state rejects me as an Israeli, but also as a Palestinian. I'm not Israeli, and that will never be a part of my identity other than the formality and legality of it.
Right.
The fact that I was born under an Israeli regime and I have Israeli ID, for instance.
Yeah. This is when they call you an Israeli Arab, right? Because
yes. So they call that there's approximately almost 2 million Palestinians inside Israel. And as a part, again, to target the unity, or to, we discussed how they try to segment and fracture the Palestinian people. So one of their strategies is that they kind of rebrand Palestinians, and they say, you're not Palestinian, now we will call you an Israeli Arab. So that's, exactly. A new invention, and you are not a part of. So what they're trying to say is that those Palestinians in 1948 are not a part of the Palestinian cause. So they are trying to detach these people and neutralize them, and yes, divide and conquer, so that they don't think of themselves as Palestinians anymore. And therefore, once that happens, they will stop demanding rights as indigenous people, because so that's the main end.
Well, that's exactly what France did with the Jews in Algeria. They at the end of the 1800s, so France invaded Algeria in 1830, and towards 1870 or 1880, because they saw that the majority of Jews were trying to please France, let's say things like that. They said, okay, this is a brilliant opportunity for us to divide this Algerian society and create hierarchy in it, and to turn them against each other. So there was this decree, it's called the Décret Crémieux, because Crémieux, I think he was the minister or the administrator of Algeria back then. He issued this decree, which gave not full citizenship, but some crumbs of citizenship to Jews, but only Jews. And it worked. And most Jews did buy into this, meaning they were happy to have these crumbs of privilege. But then they paid the price, because when France was kicked out, they felt compelled to leave. They didn't have to leave, really. Algerians were not against even Europeans leaving, but they were so much compromised, they couldn't see themselves staying. This is about telling the devil, right? Do you see this phenomenon happening with some Palestinians, who are like?
Yes, I was just going to tell you that this is.
Yeah, that's terrible.
So without a doubt, and again, we talk about how this is a byproduct, or one of the implications of settler colonialism is that it targets the unity of a certain people, and it tries to fracture and segment people into compartments so that they can divide and conquer. It's not it's not unheard of. Like in the history of colonized people, there's always a certain group of people who would think that, well, this is going to be my reality now. Obviously, I'm the weakest party here, and I should just accept reality as is and accept the crumbs and say thank you and move on with my life. Of course, that these group of people exist in every colonized
It's very
context.
tempting. It's very tempting, right?
It's not just tempting. It's sometimes it's the easiest way.
Survival
It's the easy way. It's
strategy.
survival. It's like, well, I don't want my kids to die, as simple as it is, and I just want to do. I will do whatever it takes to save my kids. But then it becomes problematic, because even to what extent are you willing to bend over? And sometimes, even if you do, that would still not save your kids or other children for that matter. So that's why problematic. But we can talk about, for instance, a political example of that, where now in the government of Lapid and Bennett, we're talking about an ultra orthodox Zionist who has been publicly bragging about killing Arabs in the mainstream media. And he said, there's a quote of him, very famous quote of him saying, "I have personally killed many Arabs," and by Arabs, obviously he means Palestinians, "in my life, and I have no issues with that." So you have a person like that, for instance, but just to clarify, he's not any worse than Netanyahu. He's just more vocal.
He says out loud what
empowered.
everybody else is thinking silently.
and he was very empowered by people like Netanyahu. Like Netanyahu has set the stage for people like him to come and take over.
In the next part,
it's important to also keep in mind that the existence of Israel as it exists now serves a function for international players such as the US, Europe. So they're there because these parties, these countries want them to be there as well.
Yeah, they want a foothold in the middle of the Middle East, if I may say. Always keep those Muslims and Arabs in check.